Hey there, this is Jim Bovard for the Future of Freedom Foundation. This month is the 29th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. That was a monument to tyranny in the heart of Europe, and it was also the source of one of my biggest blunders in my travels behind the Iron Curtain. I had crossed the Berlin Wall in between East and West Berlin half a dozen times in the mid-late 1980s. Never had much problem. Okay, some of the communist guards suggested I needed to shave. Otherwise, they didn't give me much guff. But so in early 1987, when I traveled into Czechoslovakia for Reader's Digest, my guard was down. I just figured, I wouldn't have much trouble. I'd done a piece a few weeks earlier for Wall Street Journal Europe on how the East European trading system was an absolute comical train wreck. And because of that, I figured I should not apply for a journalist visa. Instead, I just go with a tourist visa. So I was entering illegally, but, not necessarily out of character for me. So I checked into the one of the few hotels in Prague that was permitted to rent rooms to Westerners. As soon as I stepped out on the street, there was this short, pudgy policeman who starts hassling me, wanting me to exchange US dollars for the Czech currency, wanting to do a black market exchange. And if he'd done that, he could have arrested me, and that gutter snipe would have gotten a bonus. So, I says, no, no, no. He doesn't stop. He comes after me, block after block. So I finally said, look, I got no money. Can you take American Express? He got pissed and left. Anyhow, so on this trip, I was young and naive, so I thought I might actually learn something useful by stopping by the U.S. Embassy. Bad move. So I found the street address. Across from the embassy, there was this Czech military officer who was sitting in a large bay window. He was making notes of everyone who came and go. And he kind of looked like an enraged gnome out of a Monty Python movie, casting hateful glances at anybody who neared his footbridge. I saw him, he saw me, so I just kind of gave him a thumbs up, and I gave him a little A-OK sign. But that was prior to the Kavanaugh hearings, when the world learned that was a secret white power sign. So anyhow, so I go to the embassy and I meet the embassy's press chief. She was a short dumpling of a woman with a really, surly countenance. Actually, maybe she wasn't that surly, wasn't that dour, but she became more ashen the longer I talked to her. So I tell her that I'd entered Czechoslovakia illegally, and her hands literally started to shake. She was really upset because if I got arrested, if the Czechs figured that out, it could make extra work for the embassy staff. And, most of the government employees I know would consider that a human rights violation. But she was so nervous around the Czech staff that she would not say anything until they had left the room. And then, and then after that, she would lean forward and whisper at me. And I'm thinking like, oh, it's great. We've got an embassy here. These, they're really, top of the game here. So I asked her some questions about the environmental situation there, which I was investigating, looking at how socialism was wrecking the entire economy in Eastern Europe. She didn't know anything, but she said they had an expert on staff, so I talked to him. He didn't know anything either. He didn't even know how to read German. So it's like, if you're in Czechoslovakia and you can't read German, it's sort of like, it's pretty damn pitiful. So anyhow, I was going out there exploring around the country. I rented a lame-ass socialist car, the worst car I ever rented, and I've had some real clunkers. It was worse than a rent-a-wreck, and that's not easy to do. So I roamed around the country, and I eventually headed north, going towards Dresden and East Germany. So I pulled up at the East German-Czech border in the mountains at a place called Zinnenwald late morning, and the engine of my Czech rent-a-car was overheating as if I had just pulled an 18-wheel tractor trailer up the 3,000-foot mountain. I assumed since I was leaving the country, I would have no trouble. Wrong, dude. There were 3 Czech military guards who descended on my car like avenging angels, barking out angry questions in Czech. I wanted to ask, do I look Slavic? Why are you asking me questions in Czech? I answered them in German, and they just kind of pissed and moaned and eventually talked to me in a mixture of German and English. And 3 of them seized my bag and carried it off, and the 4th one stood there and kept an eye on me just in case I had a James Bond type of special seat that would that I could push an ejection button that would catapult me into the nearby forest. So since he was watching, I didn't do that. Eventually, half an hour later, those Czech guards come back and gave me one more cussing and gave my bag back and basically told me to get the hell out of their country and don't come back. And I said, yeah, good riddance, dudes. So I figured I'm going into East Germany. East Germany, Czechs, they're buddies. They're both damn communists. So I'd have no trouble. Wrong. So there have been 2 young East German guards who have been watching me at that border, and they decided they wanted to have some fun. So it's like, all right. And those guys proceeded to search every inch of my car, even underneath. Then they marched me and my shoulder bag to a nearby shack and dumped most of the bag's contents on the table. The guards pawed each sock, and it seemed as if they checked my German-English dictionary for misspellings even. They were very thorough. They were German. And then their attention shifted to a book I happen to have with me called Der Osten ist grün. The East is green, ? It was a left-wing book in German about the East Bloc's environmental problems. Is this your book? The senior guard demanded to know. Nein, that is my Fraulein's book. She said I should read it if I get bored. And he's like, Rrr. So he sifted the remaining items and got down to the bottom of my traveling bag and discovered a stack of pages of my notes and magazine articles in German on Soviet bloc environmental problems. Are these your notes? Nein, those are my Fraulein's in Hamburg. She's interested in environmental problems, but I don't know so much about it. Is she a member of the Green Party? No, she's not that bad. Huh. So they cross-examined me a little bit more, and I was thinking, have I, I was thinking, well, maybe I was able to bullshit my way through this one. Then they marched me back to my car, and I sat there for half an hour while the border guards maybe phoned their superiors in Berlin or maybe nearby Dresden. And then they returned, walking like a burial entourage at a state funeral. I was ordered to follow them to a much larger, threadbare building about 50 yards from the border crossing. East German and Czech tourists at that mountain crossing were staring aghast like they caught an infiltrator. I had a Aussie-style brown canvas hat, and a lot of the tourists, East Bloc tourists, probably figured it was an American-style cowboy hat. So I was locked into a conference room and interrogated off and on for the next few hours. The first East German officer that examined me insisted, have you ever been to the DDR before? So I'd been to his country lots of times, but that tidbit would do nothing to resolve this impasse. Ich bin nur ein Student, was ist los? Was my refrain. I'm only a student, what's the problem? And, he might have been surprised that I was, a student as old as I was, but to hear how badly I was mangling German, he could believe I was a slow learner. So he looked at my notes, he looked at me, he asked a few half-hearted questions. Luckily, like all my elementary school teachers, he was baffled by my handwriting, a mix of cursive, printing, and seemingly random smears. Sort of like chicken tracks on amphetamines. So roughly 45 minutes later, I was cross-examined by his superior, who zeroed in on that book. In a mixture of German and English, he insisted on knowing if I was, why I was curious about that East German environmental stuff. And I said, look, I'm only interested in American environmental problems. He said, "Oh, really? You have American environmental problems?" "Oh, it's terrible, let me tell you. Oh, terrible, terrible." And he said, "Oh, okay, fine." He was happy to hear that. And, I was tempted to throw out my favorite excuse that I use in America. I'm only a country boy come to the city to try to make good, but my German wasn't good enough to pull that line off, so I didn't use it. I did throw in a couple of "Ach, Gott du liebe Himmels," but, that's the rough translation of that is, holy shit. So luckily, I had learned during my teenage years that full confessions during interrogations are greatly overrated. And I felt like I owed no candor to communist regimes that were built on lies and oppression. I had another period to meditate on my sins, and then the senior commander of the border post arrived. Now he was a serious dude. And to honor him, to honor his memory, here we go. We'll put on the senior commander's hat here, and I was going to try and have some music from Marcha Slava, dun 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 dun, but I'm pretty backward technologically wise. But so this guy comes in. He's short, heavy set. He entered the room like he'd be a low-watt Grand Inquisitor. Happily, he spoke almost no English, and I answered about a third of his questions with a tilt of my head and kein verstehen, I don't understand. He took pains to explain to me that all my notes and other papers would be confiscated, along with the book. He did not seem particularly angry, just doing his duty. He was probably near retirement, and my case was just one more flea bite on the way to a pension. I had no quibble about them seizing my notes, especially since I'd sent a copy of all of them to my North German base before I crossed the Iron Curtain. And as far as that damn book, it had already been more trouble than it was worth. Those officials eventually decided to let me travel on to Dresden and to Leipzig. I think that they concluded I was too stupid to do any harm. During the searches that day, I had forgotten to mention the little notebook that was chock full of environmental debacles, which I'd already seen. The notebook I just happened to stick in front of the front side of my underwear before I got to the border. So if they had found that notebook, my stay might have been extended in the East Bloc indefinitely. Likewise, if the guards had searched my wallet and found my U.S. Senate Boulevard News pass, my Ich bin nur ein Student story would have taken a hell of a wallop. I was happy to leave that checkpoint with my hat, passport, and ass. And I always appreciated that the East German border guards, unlike Transportation Security Administration screeners, never tried to turn my family jewels into a pancake. This is Jim Bovard. Thanks for watching.